Hey, it's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Today we have a question from Lester Lowagan, who says, Mr. Dewey, I wish you the best in life. Thank you, same to you. There are many scripted fighting styles that others call it fake fighting, like pro wrestling, shoot fighting, etc. Can these fighting styles be translated or be used in real fighting matches? Or can athletes with these styles have chances to win in a real fighting match using the fighting techniques they are trained with? Okay. Well, pro wrestling is based on catch-can wrestling or catch wrestling, which is a legitimate martial art. It's a legitimate grappling style. It's submission grappling. It's really no holds barred, anything goes submission grappling. It started in England way back when, and catch wrestlers migrated across the pond to the U.S. and eventually became a circus sideshow, a carnival sideshow, where they would have the catch wrestler, strongman type of guy, and they would challenge people from the audience to get in the ring with him, and anybody who could make him say uncle, not tap out, but say uncle, would win. That's where the expression say uncle comes from in English. If you grew up in my generation, your older brother or the bully at school would pin you to the ground and twist your arm and say uncle, and they wouldn't let go until you said it. That was how you submitted. So pro wrestling used to be that. And for quite some time in America, professional wrestling was a legitimate combat sport, unscripted. Today it's scripted. I don't want to say it's fake, because those are real stunts, real dangerous stunts that require real athleticism that those athletes are doing. And yes, they are athletes. I mean, look at them. They're tremendously athletic men and women. But it is scripted. The bouts are predetermined, they are choreographed, but heavy amounts of athleticism being used. So when did it make the transition from legitimate combat sport to scripted fighting? Well, it was sometime around the 1930s where television started becoming, available in the United States. Way back when, people didn't really buy TVs because it was a brand new invention. It was this tiny little screen about that big. There wasn't a lot on. There was maybe the news, football, baseball, and boxing and wrestling. And again, not a lot of great stuff on TV, not a lot of choice. It was mostly a novelty. And so most Americans would think, I don't need a TV. I can listen to the radio and get the news. I don't need to see a man saying it on a little screen. But there was a guy named George Wagner who was a professional wrestler, and he was not an exceptional professional wrestler by any stretch of the imagination, but he was a very innovative one, and he had this idea. He saw a television set in a store window, and he looked through what was on. He saw the sports, baseball, football, and the athletes looked like tiny little ants on this tiny little screen. But then wrestling came on, and he noticed the camera went right up to the fighters, and they interviewed them, and you could hear their voices. And he realized something that was different about wrestling as opposed to the other sports, which was the camera interacted with these performers. And he realized, hey, I can turn this into a performance, because there are a lot of people out there across this country who have these televisions, and I'm going to give them something interesting to watch on TV, because there really wasn't anything. So what did he do? George Wagner took on a pseudonym, Gorgeous George, a stage name. Gorgeous George Wagner. He dyed his hair blonde, permed it all curly and girly. He started speaking with a lisp and mannerisms that you might consider effeminate or gay by today's standards. And back then, in the intolerant times of the 1930s, people thought, what? We don't want to watch this guy win fights. We want to see him squished. We want to see a manly man win these fights. Not a little girly man with permed curly hair walking into the ring wearing a silk robe and a cape. Ah, man. They didn't like his mannerisms. What George Wagner did was create the first character, but also the first heel in professional wrestling. The first real heel that everybody in the country started to see and started to love to hate. And people started buying TVs in droves because of George Wagner. Because they wanted to watch Gorgeous George get creamed. They wanted to see somebody lick him. That doesn't sound good when you say it in today's vernacular, but back in the day, people would say, "I'm going to lick you." That meant, "I'm going to beat you up." For all you young whippersnappers who may not understand the vernacular of ancient times. So, man. So how many of these moves are actually legit? I'm going to give you a recommendation. Go check out a channel called Fight Perfect TV. Some friends of mine over there in England, they've got a great channel. Joe and Brad. Bradley Scott fought in the UFC. Fantastic coach. Watch his technique videos. I know a lot of people, most people watch the fighters react to goofy stuff videos they do, but watch the technique videos because they have some good ones. And the dude is a great coach. But Joe and Brad have this interesting series where they try out professional wrestling moves from these scripted fights. And they show you what works and what doesn't. Some of it works, some of it is very much just for show. And when it doesn't work, they show you how to tweak it so that it does. So it's a great series. Go watch that. Go check it out. I think it's right up your alley. So how many of those pro wrestling moves today are still legitimate catch-as-catch-can moves? Okay, the first one that comes to mind is the pin. The pro wrestling pin we often see. Where they get him on the ground, they get him on the back, and then they lift up one of his legs and they pull it back and they lean into him. That's usually how they pin a guy in pro wrestling. Now, it's not the best or the most efficient and certainly not the only pin out there, but it does demonstrate a very important principle of leverage as far as pinning goes. Elevate the hips, and it's much easier to put the weight on the shoulders of your opponent. What else, man? The Boston Crab. I love the Boston Crab and the half Boston Crab. You can do it as a straight ankle lock. You can do it as a stretch to pull apart the leg muscles in the back. You can do it as both. The Boston Crab, as a straight ankle lock, that technique was actually in the original Kodokan Judo syllabus, in the original Kano Jiu-Jitsu. There's an old video, I don't know if it got pulled down, but it used to be up here on YouTube, of one of Jigoro Kano's students demonstrating all the original movements of judo on film. It was this early film reel, and one of them was the half Boston Crab. And a lot of people look at that and think it's just a strongman move where you need to lift the guy up and throw him over. But if you do it correctly, it's all about leverage and pain compliance. So it's a fantastic move when it's done correctly. A lot of the movements, especially from early pro wrestling, like if you watch George Wagner's matches or look at still frames of him, you can see him using what they called the double wrist lock, which I'm not talking about Aikido wrist locks where you're bending and twisting the wrist, but locking your own wrists into place like this. And he would use that for a number of purposes. The three-quarter Nelson, what else? He would lace the legs and use that to pin his opponents. Essentially what that does is it allows you to put your whole body weight on this frame on this one hand. So whatever this one hand is touching and you lean onto that, all your body weight goes onto that. So you can concentrate your body weight into a relatively small point to control your opponent's head or shoulder or hip or whatever you're trying to frame on there. So there are a lot of great principles you can pick up on if you are already educated about grappling. If you don't know anything about grappling, pro wrestling is going to confuse you if you're trying to get legitimate combat sports advice from that. So the origins of pro wrestling shoot fighting, shuto, all of that, all dates back to, it all goes back to catch wrestling, which is legitimate. So I would say cut out the middleman if you want to learn like real professional wrestling that really works. Just go straight to a catch wrestling instructor or catch as catch can instructor. Anyway, thanks for the question. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments down below or email me at ramseydewey@gmail.com. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.